And so what do? Because you're one talented person, you quit. So I'm going to go home. That's what happens to many one-talented people. They quit. I personally, I think I'm a one-talented person. Maybe a half of a talent. But usually it's the one-talented people that quit. They don't quit because they can't do the job. That's not the problem. That's not the real problem. It's not because they can't, because if you'll notice in our text, it says he gave to every man according to his several ability. So the one talented man is not overloaded. That's not his problem. His C's and his D's are not a problem. I wish that you would get this through your head. Though I am for education, I believe you ought to do the best you can. I'll guarantee you that being an A student doesn't mean you're going to be a success in life, doesn't mean you're going to be a successful Christian, doesn't mean you're going to serve God, and doesn't mean that you're going to produce anything. Now, it means that if you are sold out to God, you have perhaps greater potential than the other person. But talent and gifts and education will not make the man. Commitment will make the man. And let me tell you, you give me you give me five single talented people, and they will do more than a five talented person who does nothing. I'd rather have five one-talented people than one five-talented individual who won't do anything. All you got to do is have five one-talented, and you got just as much, right? So, fellow goes to Bible college, and he gets with these five talented people. He looks around, and he said, I can't make it. So what does he do? He quit, and he goes home. We sometimes criticize those who spend 5 and 6 and 7 years in Bible college to get a 4-year degree. I admire them. I admire any man that'll stay in college 7 years to come up with 4 years. At least he's got something. He's got something. And it may be in the long run that he will do far more than those who could breeze through in 3 and 4 years. The goal is not to see how fast you can get out. The goal is to build some character while you're there. That's the goal. Because you're not going to be a success because somebody puts a square hat on a square head and gives you a round piece of paper. It doesn't not going to get you anywhere. And so the one talented person, he has a problem many times, and he gets to college and he sees these other people with their talents and he quits. So he goes home. The same thing is true with a matter of a bus route. Fellow starts a bus route. He's a one-talented individual. He really has to work hard. He works hard. He has to get all the energy he can to get out and go calling. Stutters, feels very inadequate, self-conscious, not sure how things are going to go, no self-confidence, goes out and works on a bus route. 4 or 5 buses are running. He's a one-talented individual. He looks around and he sees somebody with 2 or 5 talents. They're running 60 to 75 on their bus. He's running 15 to 20 on his bus. What does he do? He quits. He quits. The problem with one-talented people is many times they quit because they compare themselves with the 2 and the 5 talented people. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Fellow start a Sunday school class. He'll maybe get 10 or 15 in his class. Can't seem to do any more than that. Works hard. Sweats and works and prays and plans and does everything. Can never get more than 10 or 15 in a class. He looks around at somebody else, they don't seem to be putting forth any effort. But there's some magnetism about them that just seems to attract people. And their class skyrockets, and they have 50 or 60 in their class. And so the one talented person quits. He quits. Same thing is true. Pastors, they start churches. They're one talented pastors. They have everything God wanted them to have. God gave them one talent according to their several ability. And you need to understand that not every pastor and not every Sunday school teacher and not every bus captain and not every student can have the same grades, the same number in their class, the same amount on their route, and the same attendance in their church. You understand? People are not equal. They're not equal. The only way we're equal is at the foot of the cross as sinners, and we can all be saved equally. You understand that? There's no difference. But when it comes to talents and abilities, we are not the same. We are not the same in this building tonight according to strength. There are some people stronger than others, right? Matter of fact, you want to check strength. Check that. Okay. And some people are smarter than others. Really, some people are faster than others. If you think we're all equal, let's try a 100-yard dash. You think so? Let's try a cross-country run. Folks aren't equal. There are a lot of things that are different. And God has given to different people, some people 1 talent, some people 2 talent, some people 5 talent, but God gives to everybody exactly what they need to do what God wants them to do. Now, you know what happens to you, 1 talented folks just like me, 1 talent, you know what happens to the average 1 talented person? He begins to look at the 2 talented, the 5 talented, and compare himself and say, I'm no good, I can't do it, and he quits. Why? What makes you think because you're not doing what the other guy does, you're not as the other guy? You may be doing better than the other guy. I mean, if a guy's a 5 talented person, he's only doing 4 talents worth of work, you're a 1 talented person doing 1 talent worth of work. In God's eyes, you're doing more than they are. You see? That's why the size of the church doesn't determine the faithfulness of the man. It doesn't determine it. Why? A man may be running 500 that has the ability to run 800 or 1,000. There may be a fellow that has the ability to run 60 and he may be running 80. Right? Why? The 1 talented man's doing far more. But the fellow running 75 in Sunday school gets discouraged and he looks around and he sees the guy running 150. And he stays at it for 6 months or a year or 3 or 4 years, and pretty soon he gets discouraged and he quits. You know, he didn't get discouraged because he was running 60. Yeah, that's not why he got discouraged. He got discouraged because he compared himself to the guy running 100. That's why he got discouraged. You'll never get discouraged by running 50 or 60 or 30 in a class or in the choir or anything else until you begin to compare yourself to someone else. And that's what this fellow did. He compared himself to the one with 5 and the one with 2, and he went out and he hid his talent, buried it in the ground, and did nothing. Now, here's the tragedy. Most 1 talented people do nothing. Most of them. Most of them. It's not the 5 talented folks who don't do anything. It's not the 2 talented. It's you, the 1 talented. You know why? Because they compare themselves with the others. And they say, because I'm a 1 talented person, I can't do anything. Can't get anything done. And so this person then, to cover up for it, prides himself in his weakness and his humility, and we applaud that person who does nothing because they come across as being humble. I've had folks to say to me more than once, I guess I just don't have any gifts. I can't do anything. And we're supposed to read that as humility. But all that is, according to your text, all that is an excuse for not doing what you ought to do. As a matter of fact, our Lord referred to this man. You notice what this man's problem was? Look down in verse 25. Look at it. He said, I was afraid. Afraid. You know what he was afraid of? He was afraid of failure. He was afraid of failure. And this fear of failure paralyzes people. I know I ought to take a Sunday school class. I know I ought to teach a class, but what if I fail? Right? I'd rather try and fail than fail by never trying. I'd like to run a bus route, but what if I fail? I'd like to go to college, but what if I fail? I'd like to start a church, but what if I fail? I'd like to take a class and a course in some subject, but what if I fail? I'd like to take the sign language class, but what if I fail? I'd like to do something, but what if I fail? You know what your problem is? Fear, and you're more concerned about yourself than you are the one you're supposed to be serving. That's this problem, this fellow's problem. He was looking at himself, covering up his insecurity, his being introverted, and pawning it off as humility. And we, many times, applaud this person, reading them incorrectly and saying, this is a very humble person. This person never does anything. They never step forward. They're always in the background. You never know they're here. It may not be humility. It may be avoidance. You understand? The quietest person in church may not be humble. I've seen some of these quiet women are witches at home. Haven't you? Oh, yes. I knew an old gal that came to this church. She never said a word while she was in church. She was a model church member. But I knew about her at home, and she was demonic. You see. Now, she wasn't a meek individual because she appeared to be quiet. She was avoiding responsibility. That's all she was doing. She had a talent. She was hiding it by doing nothing, but she appeared to be a meek and a quiet individual. She wasn't doing anything. Wasn't doing anything for God. Now, that's what you have right here. You have a fellow who took his talent and hid it because he was afraid. But why was he afraid? Why, he was afraid because he had his eye on himself. He had his eye on himself. And so we applaud this person's indifference, and when in fact they are doing nothing for God or mankind. They're doing nothing for God or mankind. Now, if I believe if anything is going to be done in this country, in our churches and in our country, it will have to be done through the one talented people. Now, I'll tell you why. Because most people are one talented people. There are very few five talented people. There are very few two talented. I mean, how many Jack Hyles do you know? How many Lee Robertsons do you know? Very few five talented people. Most people are one talented people. So if the work is going to be done, it has to be done by five or one talented people. And as I said earlier, you just get five one talented people involved in the ministry, and you've got five talents going. And so there are so many of us, and so few of the two and the five talented people. Now, you notice that the problem of this man in our text is he got to looking at himself and comparing himself. Now, any person, now this is worth remembering, any person who is good for anything and spends time looking at himself will eventually become good for nothing. Any person who is good for anything, who spends time looking at himself, will eventually become good for nothing. And that's what this man did. He was good for something. As a matter of fact, he had a little bit, but God held him accountable for that little bit. He was good for one talent, but he spent his time looking at himself. Now, it's amazing how we cover up this fear of failure. Sometimes we attack people verbally. We attack the institution so we can get out. I see this happen all the time. I see people find fault with the leadership or the church itself or the institution. And these folks become gypsies because if they stick around any length of time, their inactivity will begin to show them up. So they must move to new places and new faces, make new friendships without any necessary involvement, and they will stay there for a while until it becomes dangerous. Then they will find fault once again with that church and that leadership, and they'll move again. The real problem is fear in their own heart. They have a fear of failure. They hide their talent and escape if they can. And I see these folks and by the way, most of them are still looking for the will of God. That's the humility aspect of it. They're looking for the will of God, the humility part of it, hiding their talent, that's the inactive part. They won't take a Sunday school class, they won't run a bus route, they won't sing in the choir, they won't do anything. They hide their talent. Now, everybody has a talent. Some folks 2, some folks 5, but everybody has an ability to serve God. I don't know what your ability is, but I know you have it. I also know that God intends for us to serve him through the institution of the local church. That is God's plan. God instituted the church, and every member of every church ought to have an active part in that church. And it ought to be there not only to meet your own need, but to meet the need of the body. I mean, you ought to enjoy. A lot of folks think, well, I really enjoy what I'm doing, so do you think that could be the will of God? Absolutely. You don't have to hate it for it to be spiritual. People say, well, God couldn't call you to preach, you like it. You know, I just love my Sunday school class. Do you think that could be the Lord's leading? Well, of course. You don't have to hate it for it to be the will of God. Normally, you will like it if it's the will of God for you. And so, the individual then who is good for anything and spends time looking at himself will come to believe that he is good for nothing. There's not a person in this building who, if you spent time, could on yourself, you could find enough to destroy yourself. Everybody here. You could find the way people have treated you, how that life has dealt you an unfair hand, and how that things have not turned out right. Your expectations were not met. Somebody mistreated you. And if you spent your time looking at yourself, you will become bitter, discouraged, and depressed, and withdraw into inactivity and hide your talent. And by the way, that's normally what happens to people. They start looking at themselves saying, they're not treating me right down there. They don't appreciate me. Nobody appreciates me. And pretty soon you're looking, you've turned your eyes on yourself. You begin to feel sorry for yourself. And then the next thing you know, it's hide your talent. They don't appreciate me. Then I'll show them. I'll commit suicide and the whole world will weep. And don't bet on it. And so what is this man's great sin? 3 things. First of all, he was self-conscious. He was self-conscious. Self. You know what problem? He was conscious of himself more than he was conscious of others or the will of God. And the introverted person is self-conscious. They're always thinking about themselves. And so here's the route then that this person travels. First of all, he travels the first step of self-consciousness. Secondly, self-measurement. Didn't you know Paul said in 1 Corinthians, if we measure ourselves by others, we are not wise? Says it's unwise to measure yourself by other people. But folks do it constantly to their own detriment, and it either feeds their pride or they're discouraged. You can't be as beautiful as somebody or as rich as somebody or as dynamic as somebody, and then you resent those people. That's why I said many times we don't like 2 talented and 5 talented people. We resent them because they make us look in and feel inferior. But nobody can make you feel inferior unless you start comparing yourself with them. And then when you start comparing, you're going to do one of 2 things. You're either going to criticize those who have more, do more, and know more, or you're going to criticize yourself because you have less, know less, and do less. But either way, it's to your own detriment. You need to realize that like every snowflake is different, every fingerprint is different, every human being is different, every gift is different, but everyone is made of God, and God has a unique purpose for every one of us. The third after this is self-disgust. Self-consciousness, getting your eyes on yourself. Self-measurement, measuring yourselves by others. And then you become disgusted with yourself. And you hide your talent. Bury it. Folks say, I can sing as good as so-and-so, so I won't sing in the choir. I can't be as good as so-and-so on a bus route, so I won't take a bus route. I can't be as good as so-and-so in the youth department, so I won't, you see? I mean, if I can't be the number 1 teenager in the youth department, I won't even go to the activities. That's the very thing right here. You see, I'll just hide my talent, forget it. If I can't be number 1, I won't be anything. Folks, I can't sing specials, won't be in the choir. So, that's the problem. And so, this person hides his talent. And by the way, God holds you accountable. You one-talented people who are hiding your talent, God holds you accountable. You say, I'm not much. Well, you may not be much. You may just be a little bit. But God holds you accountable for that little bit. He holds you accountable. And you need to use it for God. Now, the best thing to do is to, the remedy for the whole thing that I'm talking about tonight is this. The remedy is to forget yourself. Forget